When your only daughter gets married, you expect a phone call, a seat at the table, maybe even one slow dance with her before she steps into her new life. I got none of that. Just a cold reply from my son-in-law, "We got married yesterday." It was July 15th, a Sunday afternoon in Richmond, Virginia. The air was thick, cicadas buzzing in the oak outside the kitchen window. I'd called to ask when I should book the hall, the same one where her mother and I exchanged vows. Instead, silence, and then those 4 words. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you're listening from. The silence cut deeper than the words. Because I waited. I waited for her voice. My daughter. My only child. But she never came on the line. Only him. That smug tone, like he wanted to be the one to twist the knife. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the empty chair where my wife used to sip her morning tea. She'd been gone 5 years, and I'd raised our girl alone. Paid her tuition with overtime checks. Sold my Chevy truck to cover books. Even co-signed for the car that carried her to her first job. And now, when the milestone every father waits for finally arrived, I wasn't just left out. I was erased. The betrayal carried weight. Legacy isn't just memory, it's money, sweat, and documents. The house I remodeled with my own hands was meant to be her inheritance. Proof that her mother and I had built something lasting. Now it felt like a pawn in someone else's game. That evening, my neighbor waved over the fence and asked with a smile, "So when's the big day?" I froze. The shame rose in my throat. I muttered something about plans being up in the air, then turned back inside before he could see the truth on my face. By nightfall, the house felt colder than it had in years. The ceiling fan hummed overhead, the clock ticked loud in the kitchen. On the wall, my wedding photo from August 1979, my wife's veil borrowed, her dress handmade, stared back at me. We had invited everyone we loved. Now my daughter had hidden me, as if I were a stranger. I picked up my wife's gold wedding ring from the drawer, turned it in my palm, and whispered into the empty room, "How did it all slip away?" But what I didn't know then was that the collapse had only begun. The morning after that phone call, I woke up with the kind of heaviness you don't shake off with coffee. The ceiling fan spun slow circles above me, and for the first time in years, I didn't want to get out of bed. My house, the one I'd remodeled board by board, felt foreign. Every room echoed with silence, like it was judging me for being left behind. Grief has a way of moving into your body. It doesn't sit still. My chest felt tight, my stomach sour. I stood at the sink, staring out the window at the garden I'd planted for my wife, roses along the fence, lilies by the porch. They were in bloom, mocking me with their brightness. I thought, she should have been here to see them, and now our daughter doesn't even want me at her own wedding. By mid-morning, the phone buzzed. A friend from church asked cheerfully, "So, when's the big day?" I lied. I said, "Oh, they're keeping it small, just family." My voice cracked on that last word, family. I hung up before he could notice. The shame wasn't just private, it was public. For weeks, everyone had assumed I'd be walking my daughter down the aisle. People asked about tuxes, flowers, and music. Now every question felt like a reminder of how I'd been erased. That evening, I poured myself a glass of iced tea and sat at the table. That's when I saw it, a crumpled paper shoved near the bills. A catering invoice. $2,480. Dated July 10th, 5 days before they said their wedding had already happened. My hands trembled as I smoothed it flat. If they'd been married already, why was this bill so fresh? I slipped the paper into a drawer under my tax files, underlining the date in red pen. That was the first physical proof that something didn't add up. But the collapse didn't stop with paper. Nights became unbearable. I'd sit in my recliner with the television on mute, the flicker of commercials lighting the room while my mind replayed the same reel. her as a child in pigtails, riding her bike down Broad Street, her in high school, asking me to quiz her on chemistry, her in a white dress at prom, laughing. All those milestones I'd been present for, and now, the one moment that mattered most, stolen. I stopped eating properly. Bowls of cereal, half a sandwich, maybe a cup of soup. My sister called one night, asked if I'd lost weight. I brushed it off, but she could hear it in my voice. I told myself maybe this was just immaturity, that my daughter was caught up in romance and secrecy. But every time I replayed his voice, the smugness, the arrogance, I felt my grief curdle into suspicion. One night, around midnight, I heard my voicemail ding. It was him. My son-in-law. His voice half-slurred from drink, but clear enough, he doesn't even know half of it. By Christmas, the old man will be history. I sat there frozen. Replay. 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 Each time the words cut deeper. I saved that voicemail, backed it up to my old recorder, and hid it in the desk drawer beside the catering bill. The evidence was small, but it was growing. The next day, a Sunday, I drove by their townhouse. No sign of celebration. No cars, no guests. Just blinds drawn and his pickup in the driveway. Something about the stillness chilled me. Weddings, even secret ones, leave traces, photos, flowers, music. There was nothing. Just silence, and the faint sound of a dog barking down the street. By late July, my grief had fully transformed. No longer was I simply a father left out of his daughter's wedding. I was a man staring at the edges of a lie, one that involved money, property, and legacy. And in that silence, I made a vow, if they wanted me erased, I would make damn sure the truth wrote me back in. Grief can flatten a man, but suspicion can raise him back up. By the first week of August, I had moved from tears to questions. My daughter's silence, that catering bill, the voicemail, each one was a puzzle piece sliding into place. On August 2nd, I drove downtown to visit my sister, Ellen. She'd worked as a legal secretary for 30 years and knew paperwork better than most lawyers. I sat across from her desk, the blinds half drawn against the summer sun. I told her everything, the phone call, the bill, the voicemail. She listened without interrupting, her pen tapping the legal pad. Finally, she looked at me and said, "Check the accounts. If he's after the house, he'll leave a trail." So I did. On August 5th, I walked into the bank on Carey Street, the same branch where I'd opened a joint account for my daughter back when she was 16. It was meant for emergencies, college books, car repairs, doctor visits. The teller pulled up the statement, and my stomach dropped. $18,400 withdrawn in July. The pattern was clear, cash pulled in chunks, $3,200 here, $4,600 there, right around the so-called wedding date. I folded the printout and slid it into my folder. Proof number 2. That evening, I called an old friend, Jack. He used to be a cop before working as a private investigator. I told him I needed eyes on my son-in-law. Jack agreed, not out of pity, but loyalty. He'd stood beside me at my wife's funeral, and he knew what it meant to protect a legacy. Within a week, Jack delivered. He slid a manila envelope across my kitchen table. Inside were photos, grainy but clear, of my son-in-law sitting in a bar on Main Street, laughing with 2 men. On the back of one photo, Jack had scrawled the date, August 9th. That night, according to the audio recorder Jack planted near their table, my son-in-law bragged, "Once her old man's name is off the deed, we flip it fast. Easy money." I played that clip over and over, bile rising in my throat. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft in the making. By mid-August, I had built a drawer of evidence. The catering invoice. The bank statement. The voicemail. Jack's photos. The audio clip. And tucked in the back, my most precious document, my late wife's handwritten will. She'd signed it in 2017, 2 years before she passed. It stated clearly, the house would remain in trust until my death, and no sale could happen without my signature. I held that paper like a shield, whispering her name as I slid it back into the plastic sleeve. But I knew paper alone wasn't enough. I needed allies who could speak in court, people who could testify to his arrogance, his schemes. My sister helped me draft a list, neighbors who'd seen him lurking, the bank teller who could verify withdrawals, and Jack himself. One night, I sat at the dining room table with everything spread out before me. The fan whirred overhead. My pen scratched notes onto yellow legal paper, locks changed. Title search. Witness affidavits. Each line was a step toward reclaiming my place. Then came the moment that sealed my resolve. I had stopped by their townhouse late one evening, pretending to deliver mail that had landed at my address. My son-in-law opened the door. Behind him, I saw my daughter, pale and quiet, standing by the kitchen counter. He grinned at me and said, "Don't worry, old man. Soon, this will all be ours." I locked eyes with my daughter, waiting for her to say something, anything. But she just looked down at her hands. That silence cut deeper than the words. I drove home that night with my jaw clenched so tight it hurt. As I pulled into my driveway, I said aloud, "Not this time. You don't get to erase me." Planning was one thing. Execution was another. By mid-August, the grief that had once left me staring at the ceiling fan had hardened into something sharper. Every morning, I brewed my coffee, opened the study drawer, and reminded myself of the growing stack of evidence. Each paper, each recording was a lifeline. And now it was time to use them. Step 1. Protect the house. On August 12th, I met my lawyer, Daniel Harris, in his office on Main Street. He'd known my wife, had handled her estate when she passed. The man wore thick glasses and had a habit of tapping his pen when he was thinking. I laid everything out, catering bill, bank slips, audio clip, the will. He looked at me for a long moment and said, "They're trying to box you out. But your wife's will is ironclad." Within 48 hours, Daniel filed to secure my estate under her trust provisions. That meant no transfer, no refinance, no tampering without my consent. My son-in-law might have thought he could swap out locks, but he couldn't swap out legal signatures. Step 2. Track the money. Jack, my PI friend, delivered a second envelope. Inside was a photograph of my son-in-law shaking hands with a realtor outside a strip mall office in Henrico County. The realtor's flyer showed a smiling family in front of a house with the words "Quick Cash Sales." Jack's note on the back, "Looks like he's lining up to flip your place." I stared at that photo until my eyes burned. The arrogance. He hadn't even waited a month after the so-called wedding. He thought I'd be too broken, too sentimental to notice. That night, as I watered the roses in the backyard, I overheard him on speakerphone. My daughter must have left her phone on by accident during a call. His voice came through sharp, "Once his name's off the deed, we'll flip it fast. Split the cash before Christmas." Every word was fuel. I recorded it using the old cassette deck I'd kept in the kitchen drawer, labeled the tape, and slid it into my study alongside the rest. Step 3. Anticipate their moves. I changed nothing in the house, not the locks, not the furniture, so they'd think I was still naive. But inside, I was preparing. My sister drafted affidavits. The bank teller agreed to testify if needed. Jack organized his surveillance notes into a log. Then came the scare. On August 20th, I stopped at the grocery store for bread and milk. When I returned, my neighbor ran across the lawn. "There's a guy fiddling with your door," she said, breathless. My heart sank. I rushed to the porch, and there he was, my son-in-law, crouched by the knob with a tool in his hand. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted. He straightened, slow and smug. Just checking the locks. My wife's inheritance, remember? My daughter stood a few feet behind him, eyes downcast, clutching her purse like it was a lifeline. I pulled my phone from my pocket and hit record. Say that again, I demanded. He smirked. You're just a squatter in my wife's inheritance. That was all I needed. Proof, in his own words. I didn't call the police. Not yet. Letting him believe he was in control was part of the plan. Instead, I printed the audio transcript and filed it with the rest. By the end of August, my arsenal was undeniable. Receipts. Bills. Audio. Photos. Witnesses. And the will that tied it all together. One night, I spread everything across the dining table, the same table where my family once carved Thanksgiving turkey. The evidence looked like a feast of its own, paper, ink, and truth. I whispered to the empty room, "You wanted war. Here it is." By late August, I had mailed the filings, secured the house, and stacked my evidence drawer high enough to rattle when I shut it. But revenge stories never move in straight lines. Once you draw the boundary, the other side tests it. And my son-in-law was no different. It started small. A week after the lock incident, I came home to find a note taped to my front door. It read, "Property of Amanda, my daughter's name. Vacate immediately." No signature, just bold black marker, like a child's threat. I peeled it off, folded it carefully, and slid it into the drawer with the rest. Every scrap counted. 2 days later, I noticed the mailbox flag up. Inside was a mortgage slip, $6.99, $8.42 due just before Christmas. Except it wasn't mine. The address was correct, but the account number didn't match. Someone had tried to tie my property to their debt. My lawyer confirmed it was a fraudulent filing attempt. My hands shook as I held that slip, imagining what would have happened if I hadn't caught it. My retirement, my home, everything, vanished into their quick cash scheme. That night, I sat with Ellen, my sister, at her kitchen table. She poured coffee and said, "They're cornered, and cornered people make mistakes. You need to stay calm, keep your proof tight, and let the judge see who's lying." I nodded, but inside, calm felt impossible. Because it wasn't just paper games anymore. On September 2nd, my neighbor called while I was at Food Lion picking up groceries. "There's someone on your porch again," she whispered. "He's pounding on the door." I left my card in the aisle and sped home. There he was, my son-in-law, red-faced, shouting through the screen door, "This is ours. You're nothing but a tenant." I didn't yell back. I held up my phone, recording every second. My daughter stood in the yard this time, arms crossed, refusing to meet my eyes. Her silence was a knife twisting deeper each day. That recording went into the drawer too. By now, tension hung over me like a thundercloud. Every ring of the phone made my pulse jump. Every car slowing near the house made me peer through the blinds. But with each escalation, I grew more certain, his desperation was proof I was winning. Jack, my PI friend, delivered another report. He'd tailed my son-in-law to a diner outside Henrico. Over bacon and eggs, he told another man, "We'll have the old man out by September 20th, got everything lined up." Jack's recorder caught it all. I added the transcript to my growing arsenal, stapled neatly behind the lock recording. My evidence wasn't just paper now, it was a wall, and every arrogant move he made bricked it higher. Still, the emotional toll was crushing. One night I sat in the living room, wedding photo of my wife on the mantel, and I asked out loud, "Did we raise her wrong? Did I fail her somehow?" The silence that followed was heavier than any answer could have been. But pity couldn't drive me anymore. Only resolve. On September 10th, I walked into Daniel Harris's law office again. He flipped through the binder Ellen had helped me organize: catering invoice, bank slips, mortgage fraud attempt, audio recordings, neighbor affidavits. When he shut it with a firm clap, he said, "This will hold in court." He wanted a fight, and now he'll get one. We filed for an emergency hearing. Date, September 28, Richmond Circuit Court. The days leading up to it crawled, every one thick with tension. I kept my curtains drawn. Double-checked the locks. Slept with the study door shut, as if guarding the evidence like a soldier. On the night of September 25, I sat at the dining room table, staring at the certified notice that confirmed the hearing. My daughter's name was on it too, she was part of this whether she admitted it or not. September 28 arrived like a storm. The night before, I barely slept. I sat at the dining table under the weak glow of the lamp, reviewing my binder one last time: catering invoice, bank statements, mortgage slip, Jack's photos, transcripts, and my wife's handwritten will, each page in a plastic sleeve. I whispered her name as I closed it. "We're going to finish this together." That morning, Richmond Circuit Court was buzzing. Marble floors echoed with footsteps, the air sharp with the smell of coffee and paper. I wore my only navy suit, the one I'd saved for weddings and funerals. This day felt like both. They arrived late, my son-in-law and my daughter. He swaggered in with a crooked grin, like this was already won. She walked behind him, pale, eyes fixed on the floor. He didn't even carry a folder, just his phone and arrogance. The bailiff called our case. My lawyer, Daniel, stood beside me, calm as stone. When the judge entered, the room hushed. I gripped the table, feeling the grain of the wood under my fingertips. Daniel opened simply, "Your Honor, this is a case of fraud, coercion, and attempted theft of an estate secured by a legal trust. We will present documents, recordings, and testimony." Then it was his turn. My son-in-law leaned back, arms slung over the chair. "This is a family matter," he said smoothly. "My wife and I are married, and the house belongs to her inheritance. He's just trying to control her." The judge raised an eyebrow. "Do you have proof of this inheritance?" That's when Daniel slid Exhibit 1 across the bench, the will. My wife's signature, dated 2017, crystal clear. This document places the property in trust until my client's death. No transfer, no refinance, no sale without his consent. The smirk slipped. Next, Daniel placed Exhibit 2, the catering invoice. Dated July 10. If their wedding occurred earlier, why was this paid 5 days before the alleged ceremony? The judge tapped the paper. "That is irregular." Then came the audio. Jack's recordings from the bar, the overheard call, and the front porch confrontation. The courtroom speakers crackled with his voice. "Once his name's off the deed, we flip it fast. Easy money. Then again, you're just a squatter in my wife's inheritance." Every word echoed through the chamber. My daughter shifted uncomfortably, her hands twisting in her lap. Daniel leaned forward. "Your Honor, these are not slips of the tongue. These are repeated admissions of intent to defraud." The defense tried to wave it off. Bar talk. Misunderstood conversations. But then Daniel laid down Exhibit 3, the fraudulent mortgage slip, $699,842, with my address. The judge's face hardened. "Explain this," he demanded. My son-in-law stammered. It must be a mistake." But the judge wasn't buying it. He turned to my daughter. "Did you sign any documents regarding this property?" She froze. The silence was louder than any testimony. Finally, she whispered, "No, Your Honor." And that's when Daniel revealed the final blow, the marriage certificate. We'd pulled it through a title search. The judge compared the signature against her driver's license on file. They didn't match. "This looks forged," the judge said flatly. The room gasped. Even the clerk shifted in her seat. My son-in-law's face drained of color. I sat still, my hands folded, heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. This was the moment I had built toward, every sleepless night, every paper filed, every whisper recorded. The man who had erased me was now being erased by his own lies. The judge slammed the gavel. Forgery is a criminal matter. This court will refer it for investigation. As for the property, it remains under the trust. No claim by the defendant stands. My lawyer placed a steady hand on my shoulder. My daughter buried her face in her hands. And my son-in-law, who had once stood on my porch declaring ownership, now sat small, muttering under his breath. Reporters were waiting outside on the steps. Microphones shoved forward, cameras flashing. One asked, "Sir, do you feel vindicated?" I looked past them to the sky, clear blue over Richmond, and said only, "The truth is always louder than lies." The courtroom battle ended with the slam of the gavel, but battles don't stop just because a judge says so. The walkout of Richmond Circuit Court that afternoon felt like stepping from one war into another. Reporters crowded the steps, microphones thrust into my face. "Sir, what happens next? Will you press charges? Do you forgive your daughter?" I ignored them, clutching my binder close to my chest like a shield. I hadn't fought for headlines. I had fought for survival. My daughter trailed behind me, her arms crossed tightly as if she were holding herself together. For a moment, I thought she might come to my side. Instead, she turned and followed him, my now ex-son-in-law, down the marble stairs. They walked in silence, not touching, but still together. That image cut deeper than any courtroom jab. The fallout started fast. By the next morning, my neighbor, Mrs. Grant, knocked on my door. "We saw you on the news," she said softly, handing me a plate of cornbread. "Good for you. Folks need to know you can't bully a man out of his own house." Word spread through the neighborhood. Some offered quiet nods of respect. Others whispered behind fences, wondering how a daughter could let her father be dragged through hell like that. Inside my home, the silence grew heavier. The living room, once filled with my daughter's laughter, now echoed with emptiness. I'd won, but the victory tasted bitter. Justice had been served, but family bonds had cracked. As for my son-in-law, his mask crumbled quickly. The investigation into the forged marriage certificate moved forward. He'd strutted into court like a victor, but within a week, he was cornered. Friends dropped him. His business contacts pulled back. By early October, rumors spread that he'd been questioned by police and that fraud charges were pending. One night, around midnight, I stood at my window and watched a car pull up across the street. It was my daughter. She sat in the driver's seat, staring at the house, engine idling. I opened the door and stepped onto the porch, but she drove away before I could wave. That moment hurt more than the entire trial. It was proof that while I had defended my home, I hadn't yet reclaimed her. My sister Ellen reminded me often, "You didn't push her away." He did. She'll see it one day. Maybe she was right. But grief doesn't listen to logic. At the grocery store, people approached me differently now. "Saw you on the news," one man said. "You showed guts." Another whispered, "Must have been hard, fighting your own family." I nodded politely, but inside, the war still raged. Back at home, I reinforced the locks, checked the doors twice each night, and kept my binder close. I added new papers, copies of the judge's ruling, transcripts of the hearing, affidavits Daniel insisted I file. My study drawer had become less a drawer and more a fortress. The irony wasn't lost on me. I had fought for years to build a home filled with love, and now I guarded it with paperwork and locks. Still, one truth gave me strength: I hadn't been erased. My name, my signature, my will, they stood. October moved slow, every day carrying the weight of unfinished business. The courtroom had exposed the lies, but it wasn't until the final judgment arrived that I felt the ground steady beneath my feet. On October 17th, Daniel called me to his office. His voice was calm, but I could hear the smile in it. "The ruling's in," he said. "You're protected." I drove down Carey Street that afternoon, Binder in the passenger seat like a trusted friend. When I stepped into his office, he slid the stamped judgment across the desk. "Property remains in trust under the will of Margaret James. Defendant barred from all claims or dealings." Seeing my wife's name printed on official paper again, tied to justice, felt like she was standing beside me, holding my hand. But the ruling went further. The court acknowledged the forged marriage certificate and referred the matter to the Commonwealth's attorney for criminal charges. Fraud. Forgery. Attempted theft. My son-in-law hadn't just lost his battle for my house, he was about to lose his freedom. My daughter wasn't in court that day. She'd moved out of their townhouse, according to Jack, and was staying with a friend across town. I didn't know if she was angry at me or ashamed of herself, but I prayed that one day she'd see the difference between justice and vengeance. When I got home that night, I placed the judgment in the study drawer alongside the catering bill, the bank slips, the recordings. My arsenal was now my archive, proof that truth can stand against deception. The following Sunday, the pastor at church pulled me aside. "Heard about your case," he said gently. "Sometimes justice is God's way of reminding us to hold fast." The congregation didn't ask questions, they simply nodded when they saw me, as though to say, "You endured." Meanwhile, the son-in-law unraveled. Local news picked up the story. A short segment ran on Channel 12, "Richmond man accused of forging marriage certificate in property scheme." His face flashed across the screen, pale and drawn, nothing like the smug man who once declared my house his inheritance. Neighbors stopped whispering. They started asking me outright, "What's going to happen to him?" I'd shrug and say, "That's for the courts to decide." But inside, I felt the balance restored. The man who tried to erase me was now being erased by his own arrogance. The best justice wasn't the judgment itself. It was walking through my own front door at the end of each day, knowing it was still mine. The key turned smooth in the lock, the same lock my wife had once touched, the same lock my daughter had run through as a child. Justice isn't loud. It's steady. It's the sound of your own footsteps echoing through a house that someone else swore you'd never set foot in again. Autumn settled over Richmond with a kind of quiet dignity. The leaves along Monument Avenue turned copper and gold, carpeting the sidewalks where my daughter used to ride her bike. The trial, the filings, the tension, it all felt like a storm that had finally broken, leaving stillness in its wake. On the porch, I sat with a mug of coffee, steam curling into the crisp October air. I thought about that phone call back in July, the 4 words that cut me open, "We got married yesterday." At the time, it felt like a death sentence, like I'd lost my daughter forever. But standing there months later, I realized those words had also been the start of something else, a rebirth. I had discovered a truth about myself. That even in betrayal, I could stand. That legacy isn't just property or paper, it's boundaries. It's the line you draw that says, "This far, and no further." I remembered nights staring at my wife's photo, asking if I'd failed our daughter. Now, I understood something deeper. My wife had once told me, "Protect her, even from herself if you have to." Back then, I thought she meant curfews and college tuition. Now, I knew she meant this. She meant guarding our daughter's future from wolves in sheep's clothing. There was grief, yes. The bond with my daughter was cracked, maybe even shattered. She hadn't apologized. She hadn't come home. But I realized that forgiveness wasn't a switch I could flip. It was a door that would only open when she was ready to walk through it. My job was to keep the hinges oiled. I looked around my house, the remodeled kitchen, the study drawer heavy with evidence, the framed judgment on the wall. This house wasn't just wood and brick. It was a ledger of my life. Every nail hammered, every bill paid, every memory shared. And no forged signature, no arrogant voice, no false claim could erase that. One evening, Ellen stopped by with a pie. She sat across from me at the table, the same table where we once sorted affidavits and receipts. She raised her coffee cup and said, "You fought like hell. Your wife would be proud." I nodded, swallowing hard. That was all I needed to hear. Reflection has a way of stripping things down to simple truths. And mine was this: sometimes revenge isn't about ruining the other person. It's about refusing to let them ruin you. As the days shortened and the air grew colder, I found a kind of peace I hadn't known since before that phone call. I began writing a note to attach to my will. It said, "Every heir must respect family ties, or forfeit the inheritance." A final safeguard. Not out of bitterness, but out of love. To remind whoever came after me that legacy isn't free, it's earned. By the time November rolled in, the chill in the air carried more than just autumn, it carried a sense of closure. The courthouse battles were over, the judgment was framed on my wall, and my son-in-law's name was now whispered in Richmond only with pity or contempt. But for me, the real test came with Thanksgiving. For years, Thanksgiving had been my wife's holiday. She'd roast the turkey, bake pies, and fill the house with a warmth you could taste. After she passed, my daughter and I tried to keep that tradition alive, but grief always left an empty chair at the table. This year, the emptiness was louder. Still, on November 23rd, I set the table just the same. The good plates. The silverware polished until it gleamed. I roasted the turkey myself, following my wife's old handwritten recipe, smudged with butter stains. I even set out the carving knife my daughter had once begged to try as a teenager, back when she laughed at the idea of being trusted with something so sharp. When Ellen arrived with her husband, the house finally felt alive again. We sat down, held hands, and she said grace. For a moment, I could almost hear my wife's voice echoing the words. Then, as we passed the dishes, the doorbell rang. My heart stuttered. When I opened it, there she was, my daughter. No husband, no excuses. Just her, holding a small pie in a foil pan. She didn't step in right away. She stood on the porch, eyes glistening, and whispered, "Can I sit with you?" I nodded. I didn't ask questions. Some wounds don't need words right away. She came in, set the pie on the counter, and quietly took the seat beside me. We ate mostly in silence, but silence can heal as much as it hurts. The turkey carved easily under my knife. My daughter passed the gravy without meeting my eyes. Ellen filled the space with small talk, keeping the air from collapsing under the weight of everything unspoken. But for me, the meaning was clear: she had chosen to come home. After dinner, as the plates were stacked in the sink, my daughter lingered in the living room, staring at the framed judgment on the wall. She didn't say a word, but she didn't need to. Her silence was different this time. It wasn't betrayal. It was recognition. Later that night, after everyone left, I sat alone with a slice of pumpkin pie, looking at the empty chair where my wife used to sit. I realized something profound: betrayal doesn't just break families, it tests them. And sometimes, when the dust settles, the bonds that remain are stronger because they were tested. December came early that year, frost coating the windows by the first week. The house felt steadier now, locks firm, judgment framed, silence no longer heavy but peaceful. I thought the chapter was closed. But irony has a way of writing its own postscript. One afternoon, I opened the mailbox and found a thick envelope. No return address, but inside was a letter from my son-in-law's attorney. I sat at the kitchen table, unfolded it, and read, "Our client seeks a settlement for emotional damages caused by the recent proceedings." I laughed. Out loud. The sound startled even me. Emotional damages? From the man who tried to erase me, to forge my daughter's name, to steal my home and savings? He was begging me for scraps from the very table he'd tried to throw me out of. I folded the letter, dropped it into the fireplace, and watched the flames curl the paper black. The irony was delicious. The man who once declared, "This is ours," now had nothing. No house, no money, no wife beside him. Just a lawyer's desperate plea, turned to ash in my fire. My daughter came by later that week. She didn't mention him. She sat quietly with me in the living room, sipping tea, eyes fixed on the Christmas tree I had decorated alone. For the first time in months, she smiled, a small one, fragile but real. I knew rebuilding trust would take time. But at least she was here, under my roof, where she belonged. That night, I wrote a final note in my journal: revenge isn't about cruelty. It's about truth. Justice is the wall you build when someone tries to bury you. I thought back to July, to the phone call that started it all: "We got married yesterday." Those words had nearly broken me. But now, I realized they hadn't ended my story, they had begun my fight. The last irony was this: he thought erasing me would secure his future. Instead, it secured mine. My legacy stood firm, stronger than before. My wife's will held. My house remained mine. And my daughter, though scarred, found her way back to me.